Okay, let's look at 10.4 or simplifying radicals. So if you haven't seen 10.3, watch that first because you really have to know how to do those before you can move on to these. So we're going to be doing the same thing we did in 10.3. It's just now we're adding or subtracting more of them together. In your directions, will just say simplify. And so you should come up with a single term. So this first one, these are perfect squares. So we just know the square root of 25 is 5. Minus the square root of 49 we know is 7. So 5 minus 7 is -2. That one works out pretty easy. But this next one, these are not perfect squares. So when we look at this one, we need to find the square root of square root of 8. So we come over here to our list. There's only one thing that would be above 8, which is the square root of 4. And luckily that goes into it. So the square root of 8 would break up to be the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. This is just like we did last time. But right here, we know the square root of 4 is equal to a regular 2. So remember when you change it, it comes out of the house, it changes to a solid digit there. But the problem is we already have a 5 here. So that means we have to say 2 times 5 is 10, and that square root of 2 just comes down. So if you have a number sitting out front, when you take it out of the square root, you have to multiply it by that number out front, giving you 10 square roots of 2. Then we have a minus. And so let's do the same thing for 72. So we're going to come over here. 72 would fall right here. And we're going to work backwards. 64 won't go into it. 49 won't. 36 won't. 25 won't. But, oops, what are we doing? 72. I was looking at the wrong number. 36 will go into 72 2 times. So the square root of 72 breaks up to be the square root of 36 times the square root of 2. We know the square root of 36 is a regular 6, so it's going to multiply by that 3 and make that an 18 square root of 2, because that square root of 2 just comes down. Then we've got a minus, and now we have to do the square root of 50. So again, 50 would fall right here, so when we work backwards, 25 would go into that 2 times. The square root of 25 is a regular 5. It's going to multiply by this 3 out front and become a 15 square root 2. That's a minus right there. Sorry, my throat's itchy. And now because these are all the same, like if these were x's, if this was 10x minus 18x minus 15x, you'd be able to combine those all together. And so the same thing is true with radicals. If all of these are the same, which they are, then you can combine those and say 10 minus 18 is a -8, -8, and -15 is a -23 square roots of 2. So the square root of 2 is just like a variable. It just comes along with it. And you're just doing your integrals. 10 minus 8 minus 15 is a -23. And that's your answer. So you want them combined together into a single answer. So let's try this next one. We're going to look at the square root of 18, and that would break up to be 9 times 2. So this would be the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. There's nothing out front, so the square root of 9 is just going to come out, and the square root of 2 is going to stay in. And then we're going to look at our letter, but 2 won't go into 1. I just have 1K, so it's just going to stay inside. There's not enough to come out as a couple, so we just have to stay inside. Then we're going to look at 72. As you practice these, you'll see you'll do the same ones a lot. So we just did 72. That breaks up to be the square root of 36 times the square root of 2. The square root of 36 is a regular 6, and the square root of 2 and that K stay inside. Now to combine them, these have to be exactly the same, which they are. So I can just say 3 minus 6 is a -3 square root 2K. The radical never goes away. It'd be like if I said this would be the same thing as 3x minus 6x is a -3x. You're just treating that square root like it's a variable. Okay, let's slide this up. Slide this down though. Okay, so next we're looking at the square root of 32. So we look here, 32 would fall here, so when we work backwards, 16 would go into that. So 32 breaks up to be the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. The square root of 16 is a regular 4, but because this 4 is sitting out front there, I have to say 4 times 4 is 16 square roots of 2. Then we're going to do the square root of 8. That would break up to be 4 times 2. So the square root of 8 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. The square root of 4 is equal to a regular 2. It's going to multiply by that 2 out there. The negative is going to come down and become a negative 4 square root 2. Now, because they're the same, square root of 2 and square root of 2, I can say 16 minus 4 is 12 square roots of 2. Excuse me. Okay, this next one, though, is 3 square root of 11. So we're going to look at 11. 11 would fall right here, but 9 won't go into 11. 4 won't go into 11, so there's nothing we can do to simplify that. Same thing with 13. 9 won't go into 13. 4 won't go into, those are both prime numbers, so there's nothing we can do. We can't combine them because they're not the same square root there. So there's nothing really you can do on this, so you can't do anything. So you can just say, let's say, or say can't simplify. Or not able to simplify it, or whatever you want to write there. But really can't simplify would be the easiest thing. Okay, let's look at this next one. Now we have numbers and letters. So first we're going to look at 27, and we're going to come over here and see which number will go into 27. Well, that would be 9. 9 will go into 27 3 times. The square root of 9 is a regular 3. It's going to come out and multiply by that 9 and make that a 27. The square root of 3 is going to stay in, but don't forget your p squared here. Remember, when it's a square root, you're dividing by 2, so 2 divided by 2 would mean 1p would come out. Or you've got 2 people in the house, 1 couple could come out. Then we have a minus. So we're going to look at 75. So 75 falls way down here, but as we work backwards, the first thing that'll go into 75 is 25. So 75 breaks up to be 25 times 3. The square root of 25 is 5, and 5 times 14 is 70. I think about that one for a minute. Then the square root of p squared comes out as a p, and the square root of 3 stays in. Then the next one, the plus comes down. The square root of 48, remember that would fall right here. So as we go backwards, because 4 will go into 48, but you want the biggest number that would go into 48, which would be 16. If you use 4, remember you're going to have to go through a couple of steps. So you want to work backwards and use 16. So 48 breaks up to be 16 times 3. The square root of 16 is 4. It's going to multiply by that 2 and become an 8. The p squared comes out as a p, and the square root of 3 stays the same. And now again, because all of these are the same, you can now just combine them and say 27 minus 70 is, I gotta think about this one, a negative 43, and then plus 8 is going to be 35. Is that right? Yep. So this whole thing will become a negative 35 p square root 3. The letter and the square root just come along as you go. Now this last one's a cube root, and so we've got to move over to our cube roots excuse me, before we can work with these. So this is 6 cube root of 128m. So we're going to look at this 128, and we're going to look at our cube roots, and which one would go into 128 is the cube root of 64. So the cube root of 128 breaks up to be the cube root of 64 times the cube root of 2, not 3. The cube root of 2, because 2 times 64 is 128. We know the cube root of 64 is equal to a regular 4, so this becomes a 4. It multiplies by that 6, so 4 times 6 is 24, and we have left the cube root of 2. And then we also have this letter here. There's only one m inside the house, and we need them to come out in groups of 3, so nothing can come out there, so that will just stay in. Then we've got a minus. And then we're going to look at this one. We're going to look at 16. So 8 would go into 16 2 times, so this becomes the cube root of 8 times the cube root of 2. The cube root of 8 is a regular 2, because we know that because the cube root of 8 is 2. It's going to multiply by that 3 and become a 6. And then we have the cube root of 2 left, and then also that m is going to stay inside. Now again, because these are exactly the same, we can just simplify the first and say 24 minus 6 is 18, and then this just comes down cube root of 2m. So try those practice problems on 10.4.